Okay? Contrast and elaboration can be a little bit more complex in terms of there may be words that you've not heard put together as often as you've heard rhythm and repetition. But contrast can be defined as the use of opposing elements such as colors, forms, or lines in proximity to produce an intensified, I think that's kind of the key here, an intensified effect. And elaboration, when we're talking about it in terms of design principles, is a little less literal than the word elaboration. Because when I hear the word elaboration, I tend to think about things that are very fancy. This is the way that we commonly use it in language. But elaboration could be defined better as the use of greater detail, not necessarily fancy, but just greater detail to achieve a desired effect. So if we look at this initial example, I like it because it's very simple. And you know what? If you have never used Illustrator before, or all of these ideas of design principles is really kind of overwhelming to you, then choosing basic shapes to illustrate these things can make beautiful end results out of very simple basic elements. So when we look at this design in the bottom right-hand corner, what is it that's creating contrast and what is it that's creating elaboration to make this visually interesting?
The triangles and the circles.
The triangles and the circles is doing what?
I don't know.
Just go for it. Yeah, no, you're on it. Just say what you think.
I don't know. The bigger circles with the bigger triangles on the top right and lower left
These,
corners
yep.
are kind of just jumping out. I can like the white part of the triangle. I can almost imagine that it's going into the border
Okay.
on the outside.
So they're creating contrast.
Yes.
Those large back areas, those implied large graphic circles are creating contrast. Yeah, absolutely. So where does that elaboration piece come in? The other circles? Okay, how so?
A lot more detail.
All right.
Than just the pie shape slices. More, a lot more dots and circles.
Perfect. So we're elaborating the way this is broken down. If I had just put a series of triangles and pinwheels, it would have been all right, but it wouldn't have created through elaboration the contrast that's happening between those solid spots in the background and these more decorative or more ornamental things in the foreground. All right? So you've got these guys kind of spinning around in the foreground. You've got these two circles really abstract in that they're using another principle set that we're going to talk about in a minute, positive and negative space, to give us the implied circles that are happening back here. I mean, there's no edge to that circle, but we immediately identify it as a circle. And so it creates this sort of layering effect. But if we didn't have the elaboration of these on the foreground, we wouldn't have as stark a contrast happening from these objects in the background. So it becomes a dance between these two ideas to create this whole principle set. So here's a couple of other examples of contrast and elaboration. All right? So all of these are examples of contrast and elaboration. We saw this one here under rhythm and repetition, didn't we? That exact same one. Would you also say that this could be an example of contrast and elaboration? Very often we see more than one set of these principles. Your job in this assignment is to make sure that the thing that you present to us as contrast and elaboration is really the best example of contrast and elaboration. So if I had this example here or this example here, this works a lot better as contrast and elaboration. This is still good and it has contrast, but this is a better example of where contrast and elaboration make a more visual success story.